session, Across the Dataverse, a Kaleidoscope of Careers, five leading professionals from different social sector organizations will shed light on the career trajectories in the realm of data within SPOs. Through the discussion, we will try to uncover how data driven roles can help advance program missions. I welcome Ms. Trisha Varma to moderate the session. Trisha is the Director of Global Knowledge Hub at ISDM. Trisha has over 25 years of experience in consumer behavior and insights, research and data analysis, and marketing strategy across diverse categories and geographies globally. She is the founder of an insights consultancy in Singapore and has previously worked with Procter& Gamble in India and Singapore. I hand over the stage to Trisha now.
Is this working? Okay, this is. Good afternoon. So as Soumya said, welcome to the second session of the theme. How many of you were here for the first session? Any? Okay, so that's quite a few. Let me just take a minute to talk about the theme itself. So the intention of this theme, which is data and evidence for decision making, the intention is to start a dialogue on the need for data-based decisions or evidence-based decisions in the social sector. And across the day today, we are going to be covering a range of topics. We are delving into the power of data-based insights. We are talking about how data is being used for systems change. We are looking at how policies impact how we collect and use data. And this particular session is about the variety of careers in the field of data and the positive influence that diverse backgrounds have on how data is collected, interpreted, and used. How many of you actually play a role which is linked to data in your organizations? Oh, that's a significant chunk. Okay, that's good. Well, I was going to say, which I'm still going to say, irrespective of the role that you play in your organization, whether it's data-led or not, it's very likely that data will help you significantly step change your game. Right? The educational background that you come from, the experiences that you've had, how you interpreted and used data in the past, all of them have a role in how you collect, interpret, and use data today. And all of these interpretations are equally valid and equally useful in advancing your program's mission. And that's really one of the messages that we would like to leave you with at the end of this session. As Soumya said, again, we've invited 5 special people with very special career journeys in data. They come from varied educational backgrounds, they play different roles in their organizations, and they use data in their day-to-day work. Okay? They will share with you their unique journeys, and we hope that they will inspire you to consider not just a role in data, but the use of data in your roles. A quick minute on how we're going to conduct this session, because this is going to be a little different from how we've conducted other sessions. So each speaker is going to come on the stage. They will share with you their journey. And we will go through the 5 speakers. After that, and depending on how much time we have remaining, and we may overrun by 5 or 6 minutes, though we will try and keep it as close to 1:30 as possible. We will also invite 2 or 3 people from the audience to share their journeys in and careers in data. And I'm really pleased to know there are quite a few of you, so I would really encourage you to think about it and share your own personal journeys. There are student ushers here, and they will hand you post-its for whoever is interested. Please write down your name, your organization, and the role that you play, or the function, or the designation, and pass it to the student volunteers. If we have more than 2 or 3, we are going to do a random draw of lots, and just choose a couple of them. And we will invite you to then just stand where you are, or if you choose, you can come to the stage as well and take 5 minutes to share with the audience your journey. And after that, we are going to open for a Q&A where you can ask questions to the speakers on the stage, or you can ask questions to the speakers in the audience. Okay. All right, with that, let me start with welcoming our first speaker, Akashi Kaul. She's the Assistant Vice President of Research at Sambodhi Research and Communications. This way, yes. 'Cause 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 'cause
Thanks, everybody. And quite like everything I do, this start has to start with a technical glitch. But that's great. I actually need a minute to take a look at the slide. Am I audible without the mic or try this? Thank you. Here you go. Hello. Yeah, this is better. Although I have a voice that throws, and it really helps because it strikes terror into the heart of my team. But I'm going to use the mic today. I'm going to take a second to take a look at the slide that they've created for me because I have never looked at my journey like this. And that's because I've never looked at my journey as being linear. Everything sort of just happened in this ecosystem that led me to this place that I am in today. While I would like to believe that the educational skills and the life skills and everything that I've sort of garnered on the way has helped me and propelled me here, I really cannot, discount a fat bit of luck, chance, opportunity, and things that just happened at the right time, at the right place for me to be in the places that I've been in. I started off, I'm from Chandigarh, which is I often crack this joke that the best thing about Delhi is that it's close to Chandigarh. So it really allows me to have a career that is uninterrupted. And Chandigarh is a really small city with a lot of amenities. It's very comfortable. So the idea of the career that I now have would not have even come to me because nobody was doing this. Back when I started 15 years ago, nobody was really even thinking about a data-driven career, and especially girls who had some level of maths anxiety. As we would run away from maths, numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, what is this, differential, integration, all of that. And it was just a lot of maths anxiety and fear in school. And, I started my career as a journalist. I started my career with Hindustan Times, and I had short stints at Times Now. I had a small, 3-4 month stint at Tehelka in Delhi. So a couple of interesting experiences to, sort of expose me to what a professional career looks like. It wasn't till this one moment that I had wherein I wanted to do political journalism, by the way. And I went to this person who was my boss, and I said, listen, I'd really like to do political journalism. Can you help me get started in it? And it's like, so he looks me up and down. Huh? Very typical, I think most women are aware of that look. So he looks me up and down. He goes like, "You're a very decent-looking girl. Why don't you try entertainment?" And I was like, "Okay, this puts paid to my career in journalism clearly." And I think that's the day I started looking for jobs. And this is where luck and chance came in, because at that very moment, Azim Premji Foundation, which had then just started, it was just finding its feet in India, and they was just sort of bringing in all of these brilliant minds from the US. A lot of the thought leadership at the foundation back then was imported from the US, and it just creating this collegiate environment to do development in a different way, in a more fresh way. And that's when I found that they were looking to hire for their comms team, for their communications team. And I had a comms background because journalist. So I applied and I got in, and that's what kick-started my career in development. And I mean, frankly, if it hadn't been for that masterstroke of luck, chance, whatever, I might be working in brunch, HT brunch, or whatever those supplements are. And that's really what it was. That's what kick-started my journey into development. When I got to the foundation had a very early, again, luck, chance, circumstance. They were one of the few places that were talking about evaluation. They were one of the few places that were talking about evaluating their programs. They used to have these teacher education, leadership programs, everything, and they were, looking at measuring impact, or having the conversation about how do we measure this change? Like, how do we communicate this to the government, to the donors, to everybody? And this is also to give you an idea of an allied field. The comms team, or the communications team, was tasked with the responsibility of creating the deliverables for the evaluation folks, right? Like, you had these people running the eval work and everything, but they needed to have a comms attaché with them to guide what the deliverable would look like. Would it be a coffee table book? Would it be a documentary? What would it be, right? And I happened to luck out once again and get that role. And that's what started my journey as somebody who was terrified of maths, had run away from it, had done her bachelor's as a literature grad. I was a lit honors student. My double major, actually, sociology and literature. And even in sociology, I tried to stay away from all the mathy survey wala sociology stuff. And I was like, no, no, I'm going to do cultural, cultural wala. And, that kind of background. And I suddenly was thrust into evaluation, and I was looking at all of these, oh, okay, survey, we collect data, we do all of this work to write a report, and then we put it out in the universe, etc. That's how I started my understanding of evaluation, of monitoring, of research, of learning. And that's also when I realized I don't know anything about this stuff, and that I will need to go back to school and I will need to study. And that's how I found myself the in the States, and I got my degree in international education development over there. um, the focus of my degree was again very data driven, because while I was in the degree, I was working with, the Wharton School was one of the colleges attached to my university. And I was working at the Wharton School as a social impact intern. And back then, a lot of the social impact work was becoming very data driven, was becoming very what is the because we had a lot of these corporate folks and business folks from the Wharton School, etc., looking at social impact as a marker for economic progress and economic change and everything. And the only language they understood was numbers. The only language they understood was data. So that was a great space for me to flex some of those impact evaluation, those kind of skills. So while I was getting educated in the methodologies, I was able to exercise that professionally in that space. And from there onwards, I feel like it's been a blur, right? Like, I went on to get my PhD. I worked in the States for a couple of years, did evaluation work over there. And then I moved back to India post-COVID, where I reevaluated my life options, wherein it was like, COVID, I think COVID has been a great equalizer for a lot of us, right? And wherein we started sort of thinking what is important in our lives, and where do we really need to be, at this moment in time. And that's what sort of brought me back here. Now, coming to the space of, because I do a lot of hiring. In my current role, I hire for my team. In the past 2 years, I've hired about, I think, 12 people, created a team of 12 and everything. And I often come across, candidates who are, but I don't know Excel, but I don't know this, I don't know, I'm scared of numbers. And they'll be from very sound program backgrounds, very sound implementation backgrounds, but they seem to have this fear of research, because apparently we've made research, evaluation, monitoring out to be this bogeyman that needs to be sort of, the experts deal with it. These guys, in the corner, they'll deal with it. And we don't really have to do anything. And which is why when, Trisha asked in the audience, how many of you all have data-driven roles? I wasn't surprised to see the maximum number of you had data-driven roles, because nobody else comes to the data evidence strand. Everybody else thinks that we're talking about boring stuff. We are talking about numbers. These guys will, Pakawa is talking about impact evaluation, RCT, methodology, and everything, without thinking that data is pretty much everything. It really depends on your perspective of what you're viewing as, data to drive decision making, data to, garner evidence, right? And it's very sad to an extent, but it's also changing now at how separate the research folks are viewed from the program implementation folks in development. In development, largely, the program implementation folks are the people who are going to go into the field and do the stuff. And they're like, oh, this data, we don't understand. We'll bring in a third-party evaluator. We'll bring in a third-party researcher to do this. And that's not necessarily needed, because you're using data on the everyday to make the decisions that you make in your program, right? I don't know a single implementation person who doesn't use data in a format that determines whether something is working or not, or whether whether a program should proceed as planned or not, or whether there is a glitch, whether there's a red flag in their implementation strategy or in their implementation plan, etc. And all program implementation folks use this data, make this decision every day. Interestingly, even the HR treats us as like we're some separate people doing, even in a research organization, no? The division is research and non-research. These are the research people, these are the non-research people, they're separate people. Huh? And it's very interesting because HR uses data more than any of us. All of our performance evaluations, all of our deliverables, all of our outcomes are consistently tracked because that's how apparently how business works. And they're consistently tracked. They're consistently using that data to determine whether I deserve a raise at the end of the year or not, whether I need to be promoted or not. And yet, the distinction between research and non-research folks is this thing as if what we do is something out of the norm. And it's sad because it creates this feeling in the hearts of younger students. I feel like this is not my cup of tea. I'm from a literature background, I'm from a arts background, I can't do this work, or I needed to have studied maths, or I needed to have done something mathematical in school or in college to be able to do this stuff. And that's not true, because if my journey can teach anybody anything, is that you can reach from working in Hindustan Times to being the lead for research for a firm, for one of India's largest research firms right now. And it's the pathways to how you get here are very, very different. Another thing that I want to touch upon is the necessity of diversity in data-driven fields, or in particularly in data-driven areas. And by diversity, I don't just mean gender, which is very necessary. I'm seeing more and more women in the space, and that's great. But I don't see a lot of women in the decision-making spaces or the leadership spaces in data-driven roles even now. And that's historically because I think the same maths fear and maths anxiety, and we'll do something that is less numbers driven or numbers related, etc. And it's promising to see more young women come up to me and say, hey, how do we get into this kind of a career path, or how do we do something in monitoring, evaluation, learning, etc., or in research, broadly speaking. But if we keep making research seem like this bogeyman, this you need to have this perfect skill set to get into this, etc., then you will continually discourage people who may not come from those backgrounds, and you kind of exclude this entire profession from people who should be in it. And this means across the kaleidoscope, interestingly the theme, across the kaleidoscope of identities, and which is why I started with, I'm not limiting this to gender. In India we have multiple sets of inequity, we have multiple sets of inequality, we have caste, we have gender, we have socioeconomic status, we have geographical reach, we have all of these factors that determine what career pathways will be accessible to you. And creating a fear of, or creating some level of allure around something as being unattainable or requiring a certain only set pathway sort of moves people like that away from the realm of these career pathways. Okay, so I'm getting a minute, so I'm done with 5 minutes. I have a few more minutes left. 3?
No, I think that's for the session.
Okay. All right. So see, left to me, I can talk unendingly, but I also want to have a conversation. And quite like in the nature of how I do research, which is participatory, I prefer when questions are thrown at me and I'm put in a spot, and then I'm like, oh, how do I answer this? But one way you can start thinking about data in your careers is by looking at everything that you do being data driven. I mean, even the clothes that you wear in the morning, let's really keep it at that. You decide on the basis of certain data. Na? The mirror is data. You look in the mirror, you say, nahi, theek nahi lag raha, not looking nice, change, wear something. That's a data driven decision. So really start demystifying this notion of data being something outside of you, and it'll be a great start, I think.
Thank you so much, Akashi. I love that. The ubiquity of data. I think that's so true. There is data in everything, every decision that we make every day. I also love your journey in humanities to social research, to where you are now. And again, I'm sure that that's a question, or at least I know that's a question that's come to me a lot. I come from a background which is liberal arts or humanities, how can I do data? But yeah, you bring a special perspective into data with the background that you come from. Thank you so much. You can address questions to Akashi after about 45 minutes or so when we are through with all the speakers. So please do keep your questions. If you have questions that you want to write and give to the ushers, you can do that as well. And we can take them later as well. Okay. I'd like to welcome our second speaker. That's Dr. Antarin Chakrabarty. He's an independent consultant for climate adaptation modeling at the Indian Council for Research on International Economic Relations. Welcome.
Does this work? Friends, Romans. Oh, sorry. That's. I'm not Anthony yet. I was just because initially you said that there's nothing against you that I'm taking this. I'm just taking the two extremes of data, and then everyone else would be average. So, thank you very much, and great listening to you because then I could draw on your data also, and save my time. The thing is that long back, when I was in high school, I was pretty focused, I would say. I had a very clear goal, what I wanted to do. And what I wanted to do was, at any cost, escape as fast and as quickly as possible from anything resembling engineering. That was a very clear goal. I was not very aware of that goal, but all my actions revealed it. And of course, it's only much later on I started reflecting a lot on what I did, what were consequences of that. And of course, I was mostly fond of history. I was very fond of history. I was extremely fond of literature, theater, music, and kind of Bengali variables, you could say. And but so in my desire to escape from engineering, I fell somewhere in between arts and sciences. So I fell in School of Planning and Architecture, in studying urban planning, which was not by design, as I said, but it was a clear goal in the negative, escaping from someone, failing to reach somewhere else, and landing in the middle. But then I really liked that field because it seemed to be a mishmash and a mix of arts and humanities, which was very interesting. Now, why I'm giving this background is that, of course, that intensity of wanting to escape from quantitative aspects, mathematical aspects, engineering aspects was there because we have a kind of education system that instills a fear of those subjects. And our education system is inherently a bit caste-like also, in the sense that if you are already good at something, then you can do that thing. If you're already good at soccer, then you are in the soccer team. There is not much chance given for if you're not good, how can you be good? Or is there something fundamentally that someone is fundamentally very intelligent, very mathematical, someone is fundamentally poetic? So what it ends up doing is creating these divisions. And much later on in the professional field, then one faces this challenge of going interdisciplinary, which is farcical to talk about it after having spent 18 years of education cycle to destroy it. So dial forward, I was teaching in Ethiopia. I don't know if it's, yeah, that's in the middle. Ethiopian Institute of Technology. It was a wonderful time. I spent 5 years there in that beautiful country. And in Ethiopia, I had a colleague. I was teaching master's students of urban and regional planning there. And by that time, I had successfully rid myself of pretty much everything technological, quantitative. And there was also an idealistic motive behind it. If the software that we have to use is proprietary, and if the only way to get it is by pirating it, then I didn't want to use it. Simple as that. If when somebody comes to teach a particular software that planners would use, let's say geographical analysis, or GIS software, geographical information system software, and every time the tutorial data would be of some place where data is easily available in Europe or in US, and we are working with that tutorial data. And then where is the data of our own cities? We don't have it. That's not there. So what's the use? You know, what do I do learning skills in that? So I rebelled against it kind of, and I said that I will sketch, I will capture stories, which I was pretty good at. You can leave me in the middle of a slum, I will come out of it with 90% of them my friends. That I'm pretty sure I can still do it. But that's not the only thing I wanted to do. I wanted to learn other things that were not possible. When I was in Ethiopia, that was the turning point, I would say. I met one of my colleagues who became one of my best friends and also became my teacher in a way. He was from Hungary, Titus Bugia. He was a professor of geoinformatics. He was a professor of geography and a master of many things. And he came to teach my students. And when I saw him teach my students, the immediate thing I did was to join his class, you know. And it was a class on using software, technology, and everything for. And the first thing I saw him do was to make the students download the street map of the city of Mekele. Now, how many of you have heard of the name of the city of Mekele? It's in northern Ethiopia, in the region of Tigray. And I was like, Jesus, we don't get street data, digital data of our cities in India. This guy made them download it in the sense that he didn't give it to them. All the time he was showing them how you do it yourself, He introduced me to computing, and I remember a turning point conversation where in the middle of the conversation, he suddenly heard from me that students who specialize in art subjects at the end of school do not go to study engineering, and vice versa. And in mathematical language, you can say it is, of course, possible, but check the probability of someone studying history in class 12 and going in for computer science or electronics, and then vice versa. Titus was shell-shocked. He was shell-shocked. It's something he could not comprehend. And he said, then how do you ensure that your engineers are creative? Now, then I was shell-shocked because that's not a question we hear. So he said that if you create, of course there will be different subjects, but if you create a situation like this, that someone who is very interested in art subjects doesn't even consider it in the realm of their mind ever, that they're going to specialize in engineering, in mathematics, in modeling, in complex equations. Those things are essentially creative things. Problem solving is a creative endeavor. Now, in our country, what is engineering? Engineering is something that you do to solve only one problem, the problem of your life, the problem of your career. So it may be argued that people who do engineering are not exactly fond of solving problems all the time. But what is an engineer? Engineer is essentially a problem solver. It's a problem solver. Now, people in humanities love to address social problems. They get inputs of it from literature, from theater. And then, so they are the ones who want to solve it. So we have a disjunct here. And when I interacted with Titus, then we started learning, we started doing a lot of things. So our purpose was not amassing a lot of data, but how to find data that is meaningful, how to find it without begging anyone, how to maximize open data. First thing we did, or rather Titus made me do, was to dump Windows. I dumped Windows 2016, never brought it back into my laptop ever, because I learned a lot about the open source. Now, time is limited, so I can't tell you about that, but read a lot about what the open source software movement was. What does it entail? What does it mean? Who's Linus Torvald? What was the Linux thing? I came to Orissa straight after that, empowered with these skills. And I would say, look, I'm telling you a pretty long story. I mean, most of you are pretty young. So when I say that I was studying urban planning in Delhi at bachelor's, that's like 95 to 99, 1995 to 1999. From there, until I met Titus in 2016. So it's like that long period of qualitative and then getting into this. And I felt that that enormous period of qualitative is what enriched and made me so hungry for the quantitative part that I came, that when I started understanding the language, okay, this is how you write a script.
A script is not something that a computer science student does. A computer script or a computer program is something that you write to creatively solve problems and relegate the boring, monotonous, repetitive, inhuman parts of problem solving to the inhuman entity, which is the computer. And then you take the creative task to yourself. There is a term we use called power user. Now, when you start understanding the fundamentals of power user, problems of career pretty much solve. From 2017, when I came back to India, I don't think I had ever had career problem, to the extent that I'm happy dumping jobs, because something or the other will always. And there, I would say a fundamental aspect, which may sound contradictory, data is not the most important thing. In the job, so from the background that I came, and in the job that I did in Orissa, I was a team lead for a project that probably created maximum amount of data that I've seen any project collect in such a short period of time. Because the project was aimed at granting land rights to all slum dwellers in the city, in the cities of Orissa, and then do slum upgrading. That's 3,000 slums. In the first phase of the project, we did drone surveys of about 2,000 slums and completed that in a geographical area of Orissa. Geographical area of Orissa is 155,000 square kilometers. It's bigger than Great Britain. It's about 10,000 square kilometers more than Turkmenistan, if it matters. But it's huge. Our states are huge. The populations are huge. That means there is data and number and everything involved. And increasingly what's happening in India is that all our development projects are getting larger in size. They will get larger and larger in size, which becomes a challenge for non-governmental organizations because the field gets tilted towards big four consultancy organizations. It's check a Google video called The Big Mess of Big Systems. It's a wonderful one by the former chief scientist of Airbus called Jean-François Guenest, who said that projects become large and in the essence of that, increasingly make it difficult for small startups to make a disruptive entry into it. What we did in that project was take this project, which had 3,000 slums, 2-centimeter ultra-high resolution drone imagery of all those 3,000 slums, which was actually collected, georeferenced, household data of 170,000 families was linked to it, and it was pretty serious, important job because it entails giving land rights to those people. And then there was a qualitative participatory dimension to it. Of course, conflict resolution, misunderstandings, because what's going on here? You can do, if there is fight in this room, I can deploy a range of participatory action planning techniques to resolve it. But fights going on or starting in different rooms where conferences are happening, I don't know what's going on. I need a system for that. Now imagine something going wrong and a slum dweller falsely getting relocated or evicted, length and breadth of Orissa across 115 cities where this project is going on. How would you even get to know sitting in the project office? You need not what you need is out of the box, crazy, creative aspects of data handling, data management. That's what, let's say, engagement with the Linux open source philosophy gave, because it's not about buying a toy, it's about building your own toy. The whole difference between a software given ready-made, Nowadays when I hear, what buzzwords become more important. And then buzzwords come in, they take over, everybody gets scared of it. Oh my God, this person, my God, that's like the cousin of mathematics from 20 years back. Somebody would come and say, I'm doing this, I'm using multi-regression analysis of blah, 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 I'm doing R, this and that. And if somebody says that to you, I will say, remember what one of the greatest physicists in the world, Richard Feynman, said. Richard Feynman, and you have that on a YouTube video also, I will give you the link, where Feynman said that if someone tells me the name, can you tell me how the Schrodinger equation is, like, what the heck is that? He's a Nobel laureate physicist. But then when somebody would break it down and say this, I said, oh yeah, that one. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. So, and this thing happens continuously as data is getting important. A terrible menace that has started is the data bullshitters. Data bullshitters, pardon my language, are all over the place. because it has become something like a marketable, it's a fad. It's like smart city, what is smart? Smart means, in India, smart means you dressed up nicely. Oh, you're looking very smart, you know. But smart is supposed to be something that's intelligent. Now, who said intelligent means that I have to install digital technologies? So in our work, what we did is what I call the combo of the smart and the non-smart. And I think it was a kind of interesting thing that my association with that mostly happened through my friend Titus, because Titus comes from Central Europe. They had a very different educational legacy. They were all former socialist countries. And socialist countries may have had their deficiencies, but they were super duper in education and science education, solid. And their science education was like this. It's nothing difficult. It's nothing mysterious. It's wonderful. It's it's when my father passed away a few years back, he was extremely glad that I seemed to be finally doing stuff like an engineer, like something like an engineer. And I said, no, I am still not, but maybe there is no difference. Because I saw that these subjects are my allies in solving social problems. The moment I got to know that, all of them became my friends. After that, it was a task of encountering good teachers, because a huge damage is done by the wrong teachers. And a wrong teacher will tell you this is how it is. That's again what Feynman was hinting at when he said he can understand when somebody explains it, can't understand when somebody tells the name. It's because you must understand what the heck is going on, which means it's anti-outsourcing. What we did, I had a team of 5 people in my unit handling, and in my laptop, don't steal my bag, it's right there. It contains all the data that government of Orissa does not have. They do not have because they do not know that they have it. And it's an amazing reality. Each project in India generates gigantic amounts of data. What's the use? Is it red? Okay, that's how you show it, right? I never understood that's how. You are so subtle. I mean, you're supposed to be this. And yeah, right, that's it. I mean, I stopped. So we have those magical 15 minutes at the end. I will just try to capture all of that.
And you don't have the Uno reverse card. Thank you, Antarin. I mean, that's another point that you've touched upon, the link between creativity and problem solving, and how that is so inherently linked to data. And we see creativity as part of one field, problem solving as part of another field, and then data lies, somewhere else. But yeah, all over the place. Thank you very much. I'd like to now welcome our third speaker, Bharath Palavalli. He is a founder at Fields of View. And for the rest of the introduction, I will leave it to Bharath to introduce himself.
Great. Okay. Since we are doing the bell curve, I am your average Indian male. And since we did all the engineer bashing, I'm your average Indian engineer. And I have a bone to pick with the ISDM team. When they ask me for what I do, I send them what I do. And this is not what I do. Depending on where in the political ideology spectrum you are and how provocative I want to be, I tell people I'm either gainfully unemployed or a house husband. That's what I do right now. And having said that, I think don't listen to these people too much. They have too many fancy smancy degrees. It does not matter. Do what you want to do. Learn what you want to do. As long as you enjoy what you need to do, I think you'll get there. I think that's the underlying message. While I'm making fun of them, that's the underlying message that both of them had for all of you, right? The thing with so Trisha, Satinder, Samya had multiple sessions with us to tell us about what what we need to do here. But as is my wont, I'll do my own thing. Uh, start with a bit of taking a step back, right? Because I think it's important to also recognize where we are situated and what kind of work this means in the context of where we are situated. One of the things with when we say social purpose organizations or non-profit organizations is there are different kinds of them. And therefore, when we talk about data in that context, there are different kinds of data work involved as well. The first one, when we think about social purpose organizations, is largely, for example, advocacy grassroots organizations that talk about social change and the required kinds of programs that are associated with it, right? The second kind, I would say, largely are utility or service organizations that are implementing programs. I think both of them gave examples of a few such pieces of work as well. And the third one is research organizations. Again, examples from both of them as well, and which you'll hear again from the next two set of people as well. When it comes to data in this context, what it means in each of these contexts is vastly different. And I think I was here for the previous session on data, and what was disappointing in that session on data was the focus on quantitative data. Quantitative data is not just data. You have other forms of data as well. I think what's important for everybody to recognize is there is no primacy of data forms. It's about how you use all of this data together. That's when it becomes richer. Like he was talking about, coming from a background of qualitative data to then thinking about quantitative data. I think unfortunately in our data is the oil nonsense right now. We have moved to a point where we are only looking at quantitative data. It's rather sad, and we miss out on the richness of the problem, understanding the richness of the problem when we don't bring different forms of data together. That's very critical. The reason I was talking about this background a little bit is to sort of go back to the point that I made is it doesn't matter where you start from. One of the things that I've always looked for whenever I've hired folks, whenever I've written letters of recommendation, whichever it is can this person fundamentally understand the problem? Can this person understand the method? Tools comes much later. What you do with the tool, how you implement the tool, something that the point that he made, comes much later, right? First, as long as you can understand the problem, understand the methods that you need to employ, you can learn the tools. I think all of us are fairly well equipped, and it's a misnomer that we can't learn the tools. We can learn the tools. It's very easy to learn the tools as well. So it's important that we understand the method first. So I have a background, as you can see, in computer science. But I've never done computer science per se ever in my life. What is important for me, what was always important for me was to understand the methods that I was using. So in one of the, to give you an example, in one of the projects that we were working on a long, long time ago now, it was looking at, you mentioned slums, right? So it was looking at evolution of cities and how and where do slums come about. When we were looking at literature, it was quite amazing that people from computing, the data people, so-called data people, were writing about it as if nobody else knew how slums evolved. You read a lot of machine learning AI papers out there right now that talk about groundbreaking mechanisms by which they have figured out a way to address or identify cancer cells. It has been identified before. You are bringing a new method to address the same problem. You are employing new tools to address the same problem. What can you do better is to learn from the previous methods, to work with the previous methods, to then see what you can build on. Right? So I think that is the crux that I'm trying to tell you, is don't get hung up on the tools. As long as you understand the concepts of the methods, it becomes easy. And where you're starting from, again, like you can see, it does not really matter. You can work on upskilling yourselves with respect to data, right? And I think the next point that I wanted to make was in the context of how is this data used? Often when we think about using data, people think of data in terms of only in terms of talking about outputs, right? You want to make a decision, you want to enhance how you're making that decision. That's not necessarily true. The reason I gave you the example of the 3 different kinds of organizations themselves is for, in order to even understand what the problem is, you need different kinds of data that you use. Then when you want to design different programs, again, you need different kinds of data. And then when you want to implement it, again, different kinds of data, right? So it's different at each stage. And who's using that data makes a big difference. In the context of advocacy organizations, for example, you want your communications teams to use that data. So you need to make that data accessible to your communications teams, right? You just dump a bunch of tables with them, a bunch of CSV rows to them, it's not going to work. How does that work? The same thing again with other people, right? Now, I think, I don't know if there are any policymakers or decision makers in the room, but one of the things with policymakers and decision makers is they're always short on time. Always, right? It does not matter when, where, what you're talking to them, they're always short on time. So you need to be concise in what you present to them, whether it's a one-pager, whether it's a two-pager. So how do you present that data? It's all rich data, because sometimes it would have taken you 6 years to collect that data, 6 years to work on that data, and you want to present all of that, right? But you don't have the leeway to do that. So how do you present that data in a form that is useful to the decision maker? That is a different skill set, right? And the third group, if you were thinking about it also, is your fellow researchers. So one thing when we were hiring in the organization previously, one of the things that we did was we consciously said that we want everybody to spend 2 days in the team. And it became a litmus test for us. The reason for that is many people, when they come in from certain backgrounds, whether it's computing, whether it's economics, whether it's mathematics, whether it's physics, whichever background they come from, they have a challenge when it comes to speaking to people from the other backgrounds. It becomes a big challenge. So we had this one interview. This person had just come back from Princeton, and she was talking to our designer. And she said something like, oh, but the p-value over here does not make sense, or it doesn't. So the designer asked her, what's the p-value? Why doesn't it make any sense? She was offended. Right? I mean, because this is basics. How can you not know basics? How can you work in a research organization without knowing the basics? Hey, but that person is a designer. They're not expected to know these basics, right? It becomes my responsibility then to explain what a p-value is, right? So I think the point that both of them made again earlier about the fact that having the ability to, that's why I said also remember the concepts, that's more important. So if she could have explained the concept of the p-value to the designer, it would have been much more useful in that sense, right? So I think what I'm coming to is, don't think of yourselves in the data context, especially when you're talking about using data in these areas, as what I would call I persons. Think of yourself as T people mostly. What I mean by that is you need to have a decent understanding of certain other disciplines as well. You don't need to be experts in them. You don't need to know everything and you don't need a bachelor's degree or a master's degree in those disciplines. You just need to have a decent grasp of the concepts from those disciplines, which you can pick up on the job, which you can learn on your own, so that you can communicate better with the team. And therefore, your research on your own becomes that much more useful to everybody else, right? Because like the previous example, I'll give you another example. We had the slum work that I was talking about. We had a sociologist. We had a bunch of other statisticians. We had an urban poverty person. Oh, yellow card is already here, so I shall wrap up quickly. And we shall, yeah, you need to be more forceful with that. I didn't even notice it. Yes. But, and we had a bunch of other different disciplines. Now, interestingly, one of the things that we were discussing was how to do time mapping in a participatory manner. When you do something like time mapping, the challenge with that thing, so everybody had different opinions about it, right? So different kinds of tensions started building up. Now the computing person's big challenge was, how do I store this data? How do I automate the process of extracting this data? They weren't worried about why is the data being used for, what do they need to use it for, how is it going to be useful for the larger scheme of things. So there, it becomes then a question of understanding where is the other person coming from. And therefore talking to them about, this is why I need it. And once that initial hurdle was crossed, it became easy for everybody to then say, work on, okay, this data is critical for the project for this purpose. What are methods by which I can implement this? This was back in, I think, about 15, 20 years ago. So there were no tools that existed to capture this kind of data. So we built an open source module and we pushed it out and all the other things happened. But then that's the key to understanding. That's what I meant by learning concepts enough so that you can contribute in a meaningful manner. The last point before the red card is shown, no, it's coming up. The red card is coming up. So the last point is, I think, especially when thinking about career in these contexts, one of the things that we tend to forget is that not all of us have the same privilege in terms of the ability to pick a career or choose a career. The reason I said I'm an average Indian male also is because I didn't have that luxury when I started. I chose whatever would help me earn my bread, right, and pay off my education loan, whatever helped me do that. But then, like she said, accidents happen, luck comes your way, different things happen. But then you decide to also learn skills on the job. So I think keeping an eye out, especially when it comes to something like this, keeping an eye out in terms of what kinds of work help you enjoy, help you go to bed peacefully, that's very critical. Because if you don't do that, irrespective whether it's data, whether it's research, whether it's computing, it's not going to help you.
Thank you, Bharat. There are two things that you touched upon that, I feel particularly close to my heart. The primacy of data. I completely agree with you. Data is the new oil, and this overt focus on quantitative data is the only source of data. It's not just quantitative, qualitative, and I think there's just so much more than that. And the other one is data to tell stories. I think that's something that we have talked about a lot. And the last session that we are having today, while it's data for systems change, but that'll be interesting, I think, for all of you to attend as well, to see how the speakers are going to use data to tell a story there. So do attend that. I'd like to welcome the fourth speaker. That's Mansi Kedia. She's a senior fellow at the Indian Council for Research on International Economic Relations.
I'll use the yellow as my red. I feel like we're running out of time. Thank you. Since everybody was speaking about why they chose the seat, I chose this one because I thought I was more on the squiggly side of career, because I've also moved around a lot, and while this shows a logical and linear path, I did lots of crazy things in the middle, which were like a couple of months, a few days, and those crazy things were like interning at a hotel, cleaning their beds and bathrooms. I worked at a stockbroking firm for a few months, trying to figure out how commodity traders deal. So I did a lot of things, and then I landed up where I am. And the last 13 years have been much more stable than the first 3 years. I'm not going to speak a lot because I think the stories are sort of converging. There's a lot of common messaging that has come out. One that says that, it's not about the tools. It's not about what you study. It's more about, I think it's a lot about self-learning, and I think my journey has been one of that. It's not as if I didn't interact with data as while studying economics, and especially in Calcutta University, it's more maths than economics, sadly or proudly. I took a lot of tuitions for my mathematics and statistics papers than I ever did for economics, because it was just crazy. There was just too much maths, and I just didn't even know what I was doing. And therefore I felt like economics was quite a useless subject because there was just way too much maths in it. But I decided to get into a career or made a choice that was also fairly data driven, because I wanted to become an investment banker. So so I don't know. I don't know how I was thinking. I don't rationalize that anymore. But I jumped into trying to become an investment banker, went to a business school, and took all the financial econometrics courses there were on campus, trying to design volatility indices, collateralized debt products. I don't know what I was doing. But truly, I got completely, got completely disillusioned halfway into my MBA program, and then just decided to drop all of it. I thought I should write my civils. So you know why it's so squiggly. I thought I should write my civils and do some groundwork, field work, really do something impactful. Like all of this is about me making money, feeling smart, and not about changing the world. But that didn't quite happen. My MBA was very expensive and I had to repay my loan. So none of those things were happening. So I took up a standard job at a consulting firm, did that, where I actually learned a lot about presenting data. And while that might seem very superfluous, I now attach a lot of value to it. I used to really tell my manager, how does it matter if I write percent or I write the decimal? Like, what difference is it making? And he was trying to tell me that no, this is more readable. But I get it now. Like, I think because we make presentations to the policymakers every day, and you just have to make it the easiest for them. And the point is that in my current role, they are the main clients, and if I cannot make it easy for them, then I'm not doing my job well. So yeah, that was a lot about presenting data. I joined eCareer 13 years ago. I really wanted to join eCareer 13 years ago, but they were not so willing to have me on board because they were wondering what somebody with an MBA degree would do. So I went through like exceptional number of rounds of interviews. I don't think anybody at eCareer did as many interviews as I did. And in my last one, I think they were finding it hard to say no, probably because I was showing a lot of dedication. So in the last interview, they asked me questions on what is called econometrics, which is basically mathematic tools for the study of economics. It's mathematical. So they asked me, I still remember this, there were two people who are still at eCareer. One of them asked me that, how do you deal with the problem of multicollinearity? And I looked at her and I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. And then she's like, okay, but you must know what is heteroskedasticity. And I was like, I'm definitely not getting this job. So I said, I don't know this either, ma'am. I don't know what these two things mean. But I don't know where I got the courage from. I told her that, but I'm sure it's not rocket science. I did say that to her. I said, I'm sure it's not rocket science. I'll figure it out. So I got the job. I did get the job. I got a really good boss. He was very patient, but in a very subtle way, almost as subtle as the card she was showing. He gave me, and he did research on telecom policy. So I got two books. One was Telecom for Dummies, because I knew nothing about, I'm not an engineer. I had no idea about how communications engineering works. So I got one book on Telecom for Dummies and one book on econometrics for dummies, which is, and then later I graduated to Gujarati, which is like the first book everyone should read. So, but it's been okay. Like, I did a lot of learning. But I want to say about what are the few good things that happened to me. There was skilling, but I think more importantly, there was sensibility building. I was, over time, I was developing an intuition for data. I was going into problem solving or writing research papers with an intuition of what the policy should be. So the skills are really important. I mean, I don't want to say that that I'm poor at data or I'm poor at art does make me feel complex, but I'm okay with that. I had the young people in my team are so good at it that I feel very empowered. I don't care about whether I know it or not, as long as I'm able to understand exactly, like, as long as I can say that what I can explain what the p value is good enough. But it's fine that I don't know the code on R or Python. I feel quite comfortable because I realize that the sensibility building with data, I think, is very important. Quantitative, qualitative, knowing what the data means. And I'll give you two examples and then I'll stop. This was much towards the beginning of my time at eCareer. We have recruitment seminars for senior staff where they have to come and present their research paper, and then everyone listens to them, they comment, and then everyone's like, okay, yeah, he's great or she's great, and we should get them on board. So the paper that was being presented was on salary skills, linking them to education levels. And one of the key takeaways from that paper was that the understanding and language skills, so a person who speaks better English, writes English, will get a higher income. There were questions on the econometrics, on how robust is your model, specification errors, omitted variables, all of those things happened. And I came out, because I didn't know much, so I didn't ask any questions. I was like, okay, great. Then I went to my boss later and I told him, isn't it obvious? Like, people who are better at speaking English will just get better jobs and therefore get more money. why did they do such a big model around it? So he looked at me and said that, sometimes even to say the obvious things, you need a model. And I was like, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, yeah, you're trying to provide evidence because there are counterintuitive things also that data can suggest at some point. So that was lesson one. I think just one more short story is on solving puzzles with data. And this is something which is very recent. The Department of Telecom came to us and said that we're looking bad on all the international indices when it comes to telecom. The ITU index rates are slow, and network readiness index rate. But we're doing so much work. We have Aadhaar. Look at everyone you see around is using UPI. Everyone has a mobile phone. What is going on? And it's actually a puzzle. India's digital economy is not what is reflected in international indices, but it may also not be what the government imagines it to be, right? We're somewhere in the middle. And here I think data played a really big role in terms of how we were able to disaggregate it, in terms of breaking it up into different aspects, and just a simple thing in terms of just the indicators that different people were choosing. So the Indian government was picking indicators which made them look good. The international indices were picking up indicators which reflected developed countries' trajectories of digitization, and the real story somewhere in the middle. So let me just stop at that, but to say that I think but through everyone's journeys, you'll realize that I think everyone can do it. It's not so difficult, but it's important. Like, I don't want to take away that data is not important. Data is a very important part of any job that I guess you'll pick up in life.
Thank you so much, Mansi. Again, there's something that you picked on, data sensibilities, and that's something that actually I've not come across in a lot of the conversations that I've had. The sensibility that allows you to interpret, and the sensibility that allows you to build hypotheses, because that finally is really how you are going to interpret it. I'd like to welcome our final speaker. That's Dr. Sarabjot Singh Anand. He's the co-founder and chief data scientist at Dataverse Data.
So as Mansi walked up here, I was gripped with fear. And the reason for that actually was I was wondering which chair she would sit in. And when she sat on that side, I was very worried because I wanted to be left of center. Then I realized I'm not making a political statement here. But also, it depends on your perspective, right? So if I'm sitting here, I'm on the left of center. So I'm on the right side, or am I on the left? I'm not quite sure. But anyway, jokes aside, I guess talking about my journey, I cheated. I actually gave 7 points, so I'm not sure which points were put up there. Okay, so my journey actually started at the age of 13, where as a very impressionable young lad, I was subjected to a cold shower on a December morning in the deer park in the open. And as such, my sensors on my body, talking about data, were actuated. And I was sitting there. This was actually a Sikh camp for children. And there was a hymn being sung where, roughly translated, it said, the soul telling the body, you've got a human body with great difficulty, based on the philosophy. What are you going to do with it that is going to make impact? And as I was impressionable at the time, I took this seriously. What didn't help was that I had a mother that was working in the social sector, working with orphaned and abandoned children, and a sister as well that worked in the social sector, transforming education across the country. But anyway, that happened a lot later in my life. At 13, I took this in, and it obviously kind of was bugging me that I have to find some way of having impact. And I'm still looking. So anyway, a few years later, I graduated with math, so I apologize. I'm one of those guys. And not knowing, being clueless still of what I should be doing, I ended up being nudged to Belfast, which is in Northern Ireland, for those of you who are unaware of this city, by a cousin of mine. And while everybody around me was busy asking me at the time whether I was a Catholic Sikh or a Protestant Sikh, because they seemed to kind of take that very seriously, I Irish danced my way through a master's and ended up getting a research position by the professor who was running the master's. And a few months into this research position, I realized I was in the wrong place. I was asked to optimize reinforcement within concrete slabs. So you can understand my predicament here. So I decided this is not for me. I've got to do something different. But of course, the little Indian community that existed in Belfast, because it wasn't the cool place to go to, so only those who didn't know where to go went there. The Indian community, of course, surrounded me and made me realize that if I gave up this position, it's going to give a really bad impression of Indians. And for generations, no professor is ever going to hire an Indian ever again. At which point, I did what my heart told me and still resigned. I didn't have any Indian friends after that, but what I did do was I got another job, a research position again, but this one introduced me to machine learning and artificial intelligence and data. And so I learned a very important lesson that day, that career choices need to be based on happiness rather than on the noisy voices around you that you just need to deafen down. Anyway, I fell in love. It was love at first sight with data, if that is possible, but enjoyed that experience, ended up doing my PhD in that space, lots of consultancy work, even started up a startup in Northern Ireland that won the European IST award for innovation in IT. But there was still something missing. And so in 2012, I decided I'm going to come back to India. And I started up Tatras Data, which was set up as an organization that aimed to be a research lab for those who can't afford their own. Which, of course, was a commercial entity, so we ended up working for a lot of startups in the US, building intellectual property for them using AI and machine learning. But in a parallel universe, there was a friend of mine who was working for Accenture in Chicago, and he decided to give up his job. And his explanation was he had got sick of making rich people richer. So he joined the Obama campaign as the chief scientist, got him into the White House for the second time, and then decided that's not for him either. So he was having the same predicament as I was. And so he ended up going to the University of Chicago and starting the Data Science of Social Good Center there. And that was very inspiring to me. And I thought, well, I am in the land of opportunity when it comes to having social impact. And I've learned a little bit of data science over the years, so why not do something similar? And so I went around roaming, wondering where I should do this. And I was very lucky that two episodes helped me decide where I had to set up the center and what I had to do with it. The first was when I went to the Agri Vision conference in Hyderabad. And you can imagine that, going to a Agri Vision conference, looking the way I do, I must be a farmer. So I went there and everybody thought I was a farmer. And I wished I was that lucky, because actually any plant that I've been given as a gift, I've killed. So I don't have the skills. The second incident, not too far away from Hyderabad, was in a place called Visakhapatnam, where I was asked to come as a judge for a fintech conference, where the government was promising to give $1 million to startups. That impressed us, I guess. So I went there and I met the Minister for IT at the time, and he was boasting about how they had 1 million sensors in the wild, where data was coming at great speeds towards his dashboard, crashing against it and helping him make decisions that were data-driven. And he turned around and said, you should come here and set up your Data Science for Social Good Center. I mean, how many sensors are there in Punjab? So that reminded me of an incident while I was in Ireland where I went for an extension of my visa, and the immigration officer said, "Why do you want this extension?" And I said, "I'm doing a PhD in computer science." And he looked at me and said, "Why do you want to do a PhD in computer science? How many computers are there in India?" How wrong was he? So, but anyway, so I decided, as every self-respecting human being would do, that I'm going to set up the center in Punjab. So off I went to Punjab, and in Mohali we set up the center in 2018. And we put together a world-class curriculum with the network of academics that I had been lucky enough to meet during my academic career in the United Kingdom. And what we did was we decided that at the center of that curriculum has to be what we called a passion project, where people have to build something. It's not good enough to know the theory. You've got to be a data scientist when you build something, right? And you've got to graduate with a suntan, because you've got to be out there in the field empathizing with the folks that you're creating solutions for. And those passion projects have to be social impact projects. And no surprises, the first project that we did was for the farmers. So we built a platform that collected all sorts of interesting data. I apologize again, it was mostly quantitative. From satellites to drone-based images. In fact, I was lucky enough to meet someone who became a friend as a result, who started an IoT program as well as part of the Sabudh program. And so we created IoT devices as well for the farmers. And the important thing here is that we made all of this training free, because we didn't want any student to be gated by not having the money to pay for the education that we were providing. So all of the training that we provide in Sabudh is free. The passion projects include things like voice recognition of birds, because we had put IoT devices out in reforestation projects being run in the state and beyond, that was collecting recordings of birds to understand how do the bird populations change. We worked with a rural network of schools that had gone solar to predict how much solar energy they'd be producing, looking at optimizing the bus routes that these networks were using to bring students into their rural schools and so on. And I think the results have been interesting. We've had students that decided after doing this training, okay, yellow card, there we go. They've gone on to work in commercial organizations, which is perfectly fine. They've got skills that we've been able to provide them with. There are others that have gone on to do master's programs in Canada and have called me on Teachers' Day saying, hey, thank you for giving me skills before I went off there, because I'm not flipping burgers anymore. I'm actually teaching AI and machine learning while I'm doing a master's in AI and machine learning, because I already know the stuff that was taught there, right? We've been very lucky that the Delhi government asked us to come and do a program with their schools of specialized education recently, teaching them IoT and AI and to, again, build stuff with it. And they've now asked us to spread that to 100 schools instead, right, of just sticking to the one school. So, we're hoping that this wave continues. We are hoping that we can create skilled individuals that not only look at getting these skills in social impact projects that they're doing during their training, but can also stay on in the sector and start to become entrepreneurs that have social impact, right? And that's when I might feel that hymn that I listened to when I was 13 may actually be paying some dividends. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarab. There's one thing that you said that really resonates. Good career decisions are those decisions that make you happy. Finally. And I would really encourage people to please check out the Sabudh Foundation. I also just, heard about it in more detail today, but it's fascinating work that you're doing, and I can imagine that being useful, for all of us. So please do check that out. want to check whether there's anyone in the audience who would like to share their journey. I don't think any notes been passed to any of the ushers. There are? Oh, so sorry. Questions. Okay. If there are questions, then we'll. Oh, that's a lot of questions. Okay, so I'm just going to check once again. Anyone who wants to share their journeys, otherwise we'll open the floor for questions. You'd like to share your journey? Fabulous. You have
Hello.
5 minutes,
I'll
and there is
take-
a yellow card at 2 and a red card at 5.
So, hello everyone. My name is Praveen, and I'm working as a MEL associate in Lane Hand India in Delhi. So, my journey started with civil engineering in like a small town college. I just finished my civil engineering, but while doing engineering, I just interested in dance, yoga, martial arts, all the physical activities. So I just like I went to Mumbai and I learned. I did a diploma in dance and learned different skills. And I started a startup around from physical like performing art to holistic development. I was working with the different schools and colleges. So before COVID, I did this thing, and while that doing, I like got a lot of data, and like I was like learning around data things and all. And in COVID, I got a chance to like learn little bit about coding, then go into data science and all. And just I got a like fortunately I got a chance in as a Gandhi fellow. I worked with two districts in Madhya Pradesh as a I was delivering a project of Niti Aayog, SAT project, Sustainable Action for Transforming Human Education, and I was working around like lot of data governance. So in district there was a lot of data from schools and from monitoring, but not like they don't have like people to cater and leverage that data and like take a database decisions. So I did that work. I was very fortunate. I learned from like I worked with CEOs and district collector, DO, and from that I learned a lot of things, and I decided I'll do something in data, and then I joined a data science course. I learned, and now I'm working with the Land Hand India, and almost I'm like dealing with data from 20 different states. Like almost every day I'm like rowing data in different tools, but the important thing is like we are going from like I'm trying to like make something sense from qualitative quantitative data and to present it into quantitative form that can like help my senior management to take decision proactively and like govern all this and help states to improve their vocational education in their states. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I did not need to show the red card. There are 5 questions here, and I'm just gonna just take them randomly. And whoever's asked this question, if you feel that you want to add anything to it, please do feel free to stand up and add. Bharat, actually, this question is addressed to you. It says, how do you disseminate complex data to different stakeholders? Can you recommend resources? And then a follow-up question is, how do you ensure participant agency during data collection? So that's for you. If there's anything that you want to add, please go.
Thank you so much for talking about. Hi, I'm Akanksha from Dream a Dream, and thank you so much for talking about qualitative data. So one question for the second question that I've been grappling with is that how do you ensure like that participants are co-creators in data collection? Because a lot of times when we are, especially when we collect data, we go to them, we say, yeah, we'll do this, but how do we actually bring it back to them? That, you have helped us do this. So that is my main question.
How do you disseminate complex? So one of the things that it doesn't like what I'm saying. The thing is, I think over the last 15, 20 years, we have a lot of tools that have come up at our disposal, right? 20 years ago, if you wanted to present data in interesting ways, it used to be skits. It used to be street plays. But right now, we have a whole host of information dissemination modes, right? Whether it's podcasts, whether it's the sketch notes that's being done outside. I think what is critical to understand rather than think about which one is who are you targeting? So if you're targeting, like I mentioned earlier, children in the context that you're talking about, I think we underestimate especially with the young audience, we underestimate their capacity to understand nuance. We don't need to, I think that's where we need to be careful that we don't simplify data, right? We shouldn't make it simplistic. We retain the complexity of what we are presenting. That is key, especially with a young audience as well, and which is true for across the board, everybody, right? I think we sometimes forget that people are capable of understanding things, and in that sort of enthusiasm, we simplify it and make it simplistic. Simplification is also okay to a certain extent, but let's not make it simplistic. So understanding your target audience would be the key. You have a whole host of methods today, right? And then the second, I think, is a very interesting question about agency for the participants and how do you take it back. I'll give you a few examples of how we've done it. Because it's again different for each kind of target audience, right? Because, for example, in one of the projects that we worked with on collecting data in the slums, so it took us about 2 years more, but we put our foot down and said we will do it in a participatory manner. So we actually worked with the slum dwellers. We trained them to collect their own data. So it took us about 6 months to train them in what are fundamentals of research methods, how not to ask biased questions or biasing questions, what is triangulation of data, very elementary things, right? But we worked with them to train them on that, and then they went out and they collected the data. And then when the data came back, we worked with them to clean the data. So one of the, we haven't put this study out, but one of the interesting things is because the slum dwellers themselves collected the data, the quality and accuracy of the data improved tremendously. It's probably, I can assure you that it's probably, other people have, we put the data out in the open after due diligence, but it's probably one of the best data sets on urban poverty in India that's available for public to use because of the quality of the data. The third step was how did they make use of the data, which is the critical step, right? Yes, they were part of the journey, but how do they make use? So what we did was we worked with a few of the slums which were interested, which had the time and the ability, and basically they had the luxury of time, let me put it that way. Because what we did is we worked with them to create these one-page booklets that they could use. We templatized the whole process in such a manner that if tomorrow they want to go to their local councillor, the local corporator, the elected representatives, whoever it is, and argue for water, then they could easily then query this data and say, this is the water problem in my slum. Right? So one is working on skills, the other is need. And the third one actually is the critical element is how do you take a step back? How can they do it themselves, right? So the third element is the harder one. It's also very challenging for people because that means your importance reduces, right? That's also where funders don't like it sometimes. But it's a battle you fight. Sorry, does that answer the question?
Thank you. There's another question here. It's not addressed to anyone specifically, but it's kind of an extension, I think. Says, from my experience, I have seen nonprofits in education work on data collection and M&E only to use them as tools to answer to their donors. This impacts the lack of quality impact assessment and program improvement. How can this be addressed so that organizations are motivated to work on data collection and M&E from the planning stage? Opening it to any of you to.
I'll take a gander at it since I was invited to this because I teach a course on MEL, by the way. So there's a certificate program that we run out of Sambodhi, that's the MEL for DP course, and this is a very essential part of the cycle where we learn about the project cycle and what needs for data are required at a needs assessment, at a implementation stage, and at an evaluation stage. And the problem with data is that it's looked at it being entirely evaluative in nature. right? Like when in development or in the social work arena, what people look at data, and this is what I was talking about, creating data as a bogeyman. It's looked at as being something that is only evaluative in nature. And when we look at something as being evaluative in nature, we treat it like a report card. So the need of it is only when the project is done. Right, you only need a report card when the project is done. You don't really need it to make decisions or to even determine needs. And that is something that is inherently flawed, even in evolved understanding of evaluation, in evolved understanding of monitoring, in evolved understanding of newer research on evaluation that's coming out. You know more and more that needs assessment is a thing. Situation analysis are things that you're supposed to do before you even embark on designing a project. And then monitoring is something you do it has to be side by side. It can't be outside. You can't really implement a program without monitoring it. Like if you've designed a program to have 15 sessions, then how are you not going to count if you've had 15 sessions? Or are you not really holding head count for how many people are attending each session, and therefore be able to tell whether your program is, if you've got 30 attendees in the first session and 2 in the second, something's fallen off, right? And that's going to help you make the decision as to what fell off. There's a red flag here. What do I do? So I think a lot more organizations are understanding and this is not quantitative, qualitative, but primacy of data in general, primacy of information. Let's call it information. The primacy of information when we are making decisions. And I think Bharath had said this earlier when he was speaking, was that it's not just about decisions. But for me, even planning is about decisions. Even designing is about decisions. The decision to make to provide a certain vaccine in a certain locality is a decision that determines and has multitude of effects for health of children in that area for years to come. These are all decisions. And if they're not driven by actual accurate information from the field, then we actually really stand to lose a lot in terms of money and in terms of actual human life cost, right? So that's one piece there. Thank you.
Just because you said planning vaccination, because I was an immunization advisor to the Ministry of Health, and when we eradicated polio, WHO was working behind the scenes for decades, and before that, CDC was working behind the scenes for decades. And then, of course, Government of India was working, and that is how we were able to eradicate polio. It was a very mammoth exercise. And when you go to the field, I used to go and supervise and see we used to have very detailed micro planning of areas. There are so many pockets where why we were not able to eradicate polio. In everybody would ask why India is not able to eradicate polio, because there were these, populations, the migrant populations, they would just stay in outskirts of cities, outskirts of, they didn't have Aadhaar card, they didn't have any identification. So it was so difficult to actually vaccinate them. And that was because, and then that the polio virus would continue to remain in the ecosystem. So, well, there's a lot that goes into planning.
Yeah. There's one question here that I'm going to leave for later. Antarin, someone's asked you a question which is specifically to do with academia. Whoever's asked that question, I would ask you to, speak with Antarin after the session. I have one more question that I'm going to take, and then we'll kind of call an end to the session. Akashi, actually, this was meant for you specifically, but I'm going to open it up for anyone, I think, who can. How do you use data to show impact of your program if the impact of the program is long-term? And I think this is a question that many of us have. Someone is trying to conduct, okay, something, I'm sorry, I can't figure that out, and it's coming from a funding background. Okay. Impact evaluation from a funding background. Yes.
All of you need funding now, no?
I would think that at least how we try to work on it is to always have, like, I'm sure everyone has that. I mean, I don't think we're doing anything new or different, is to have milestones, and also a reevaluation of those milestones. So when we start on a project, and so we don't do a lot of program implementation work, but even when we are designing or suggesting, it is to say that, okay, we hope to achieve X by this point and Y by that point, and then once we are at X, then you also sort of see whether the future milestones will be achieved or not. So for example, I can say something that we've been doing for a government project. Let's say the Bharath project. Sorry, all my examples are from digital and telecom because that's the work I do. So if you're looking at Bharath project, that's been going on since 2011, and they had. Their first milestone was actually 2013, but nothing happened in 2013. And then finally, the 2013 target was met in 2017. So when we were doing an evaluation for them, then all the milestones that they had set 2013, post 2013, were also revised based on the experiences. So I don't know, there's nothing new in it, but that's the only way that we've sort of thought of that it has to be a very dynamic process of assessment. I don't think, because long-term projects become very unpredictable as well. Like yeah, please. Go ahead.
We're very polite to each other. But since I have the luxury of not having to be polite anymore, instead of beating around the bush, I think it's high time we stop fantasizing about quantitative metrics for impact. Especially because we are talking about, like what she was talking about, polio, right? It takes 30 years sometimes to see this change, man. Let's get realistic. It's our hubris to think that it's going to change because we did something in one place as a small organization, big organization. You did one thing at one point of time. These are problems that have been around for a long time. So let's get real. What are you measuring? How are you measuring? And what would you like to understand, right? You would like to understand how quality of life has improved. How systemic issues have changed. There are much better qualitative indicators that you can understand to see if that there has been a change. And that change sometimes can be a delta change. It doesn't have to be a transformative change that happens overnight, right? Many contexts that can happen. Some of the examples she was talking about in terms of certain kinds of payment methods, certain kinds of telecom infrastructure, it is transformative. And it's easier to measure that in a quantitative manner. But there are a whole host of other things that I think funders and SPOs, as she very nicely calls them, have to push back on in terms of understanding what impact metrics are. Right? It's important that we push back because these things take time. We need patience. We need to work on it for a decade. We need to sometimes work on it for 5 years, and only then do we see any tangible change. Some of the examples he was giving, if somebody asks him to measure after the classroom session that had happened, have you had impact? It's nonsensical. That person has gone 3 years later, 4 years later, and then called him up to tell him about the success story, right? So I think it's important for us to also understand how social change happens and therefore think about metrics from that perspective. One of the nice things Ravi said in the morning is, don't force fit models from the management world here. What is the management theory that is required over here, right? I think that's the key. Sorry, not too much more time. Oh, sorry, this is.
Okay. No, you go first. Because it was like when she did it.
So should I pass it to her?
That one works too, I think.
Go to them.
I don't really have a lot to add to that, but I do also want to flag that we have to be realistic. We live in a donor-driven industry, right? And there is only so much pushback that is possible. There is only so much pushback that you can actively do. No, absolutely. And of course, funding funds my job. It funds the job of 12 people I employ. And for me, that is very, very important because they need jobs to run their own households, right? And the point over here is that there is a certain level of luxury that is there to push back also. And we have to call it out for what it is. I mean, one thing that I didn't really introduce in my introduction was that my dissertation was on power dynamics and participatory methods in the Global South. Right? So I know exactly the grapples of even doing participatory work. I mean, Bharath outlined this, but participatory work never really reaches decision making. They will not get to decide how they're using the data. They will be trained data collectors. Somebody else will come and employ them and give them that work. Let's call it out for what it is. This is the nature of the industry. This is how the industry works. How do you create realistic outcome expectations for donors in a long-term program? I think that is what we can actively focus on in the next 5 years, right? Because a lot of programs will have long-term eradication of polio is a 30-year fight. I'm working on a child protection thing. Child protection is going to take us 50 years before we see even some minuscule movement, right? So if my responsibility as an evaluator is to say that at 10-year mark I can see this change, but at 3-year mark you can only expect this change. At 3-year mark it might just be that the government has woken up and said there needs to be an act. That is your marker of change, right? Being realistic in your own expectations and being dynamic, like Mansi said. You have to be very dynamic. In 1 year, if you say that government to sun bhi nahi rahi hai, they're not even listening, right? Then 3 years, that's also not going to happen. No act is coming. So you have to be very realistic and respond to the timelines. And be mindful that as much as we would like to push back, I have a job that depends on this money, guys.
You can be gainfully unemployed.
I think a good point that she made, sorry, just to add that there are sort of controllables and uncontrollables in the impact, right? Some that you can determine quite easily that yes, we can do this, and then there's some that depends on other ecosystem stakeholders that you may not be able to determine. So maybe, sorry.
I will just add, because since I was involved specifically in a project like that, I mean, we don't even call it a project, that's why we call it a mission, which was this Jaga mission of Orissa, which started with giving land rights to all slum dwellers in the state and then upgrading all. Now, you cannot measure impact of it. And, but what is very nice now is that while donors, so we were of course, let's say, led by the state and then an ecosystem of organizations that cluster around it, which involves philanthrocapitalist foundations, consultants, big four, small 40, everyone. It's a huge canvas because it's a huge project. Now, donors themselves, while donors continuously try to arm twist the individual organizations who are partnered with it, they cannot arm twist the mission itself. Now, what happens in the mission? How can you cannot measure? Because I would like to say, sometimes I end up using words like idiots and all. I have nothing against it. It's just a style of speech. So some morons wanted to measure, for example, that because we have 9 components, 9 in. So, for example, I mean, I was very happy. I didn't think that I would live to see that, but. The principal secretary who leads this matter, a wonderful person, and this whole cluster of mission actors like us, we were welcoming a World Bank delegation, and there was an exhibition for World Bank, this and that. And the first day World Bank came, the second day World Bank left, and left as in left, never to come back again. And for the simple reason that we didn't need their money. We didn't need their money. We were happy to take their money as something extra. Give to a good cause. Now the thing is, and the answer that was given to them is, that why is it that we have to measure water supply to slum dwellers immediately in user fees? So not only are they saying that you measure, it has to be measurement in their terms. So the reply of the government was that, look here man, informal settlement, 80% of the economy of our cities, they drive the city, they are working class of the city, they have already paid. Let's imagine they have already paid. We have not done our part. Maybe someday in the future, when we have improved their wages also, we can charge. But why? The bus system of Orissa, it runs on gross cost model, not on net cost model. Now, these are all anathema to, because donors are not just giving, they are also pushing a sort of ideology, right? And when they push that ideology, and I will just end with a simple example. When donors end up realizing that this is too big even for them, and then they fall in line, BMGF would never leave Orissa, never leave Orissa. Where else would they go? Who else would get the job done for them so well? Now, so we give water supply to the slum, right? Now somebody tried to measure, okay, if it is 400 crores money given, then let's divide it by 3,000 slums. Oh, we have only a few lakhs left. And then I pulled out the budget, because the budget, Orissa budget, you can get the PDF. And I said, look, man, it's written here. This is 2 lakh rupee for 20,000 PMAY houses. They just took this money. People wanted to hear how much money it is. They put 400 crores. And the principal secretary said himself the CM asked him, Naveen Patnaik asked him, how much money do you need for Jaga mission? And when Principal Secretary said it, I burst out laughing. I was in the first row, I burst out laughing. He said, sir, I don't know, something like 500 crores to 1,000 crores? And I said, that's the range? And he said, we don't know. Now the thing is that it's good that they don't know, because there is a mission called Basudha mission, which provides drinking water, piped water supply to Orissa. Now, Basudha mission has an urban counterpart which says 263 crores in 2019 would be water supply for piped water supply in urban areas. Jaga mission piggybacks that. Money is already there. They say, how do they do it? They say the pipeline will not circumnavigate the slum, it will go through the slum. There is money for LED street lighting. It will not go bypass the slum, it will go through. Where is the money? Money is already there. Mission Unnati. Mission Unnati does LED street lighting. They will pay. You know, who pays for the electricity? Okay, they gave it all to Tata Power now, but okay, fine. Tata Power will give. You know, government will take care of the costing. So now find some great super duper scientist, donor scientist who will come and say, find the fraction of 263 crores that's going to slum. Why do you need it? You know? So when they realize the impossibility of it, they come along, and the whole realization, they get over this stupidity that I have given land rights today, the person will transform tomorrow. The capitalists of the world have not transformed in like 200 years. They will die like that. So that's
Yeah,
I was actually
exactly
going to
I was thinking.
I was actually going to say where I am is left, so you are
Yes.
with the left, you don't have to be on the left.
Absolutely. He has been on the far left. Well, it was, I'm sure you'd all agree, it was a super interesting, a super inspiring session. I'd like to thank all our wonderful speakers for inspiring all of us with stories of your journeys, as well as stories of, India in general. And with that, I'd like to call an end to the session. Thank you very much.